Hello and welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show is dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, our community. This community is made up of developers, distro maintainers, YouTubers, and everyday users. Each one plays a vital role in our community, and the goal is to have a discussion with each individual about their journey into Linux and beyond. So join me now as we turn the spotlight on. Hello, I'm your host, Rocco, and with me today is my friend, Joe Panico. Joe, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. I appreciate being here.
Well, this was a something that we had to do because you have been, a BDLL member from the very beginning. You were on the very first live stream that I did, and so you've been a long-time supporter of the channel, and I appreciate that.
Yep. I love this channel. I love the people that it's grown into, the community. It's been fabulous.
Yep. Well, people know you from being on BDLL, but who is Joe Panico personally?
Well, I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. Much like the show last night is, I went, it's quiet because my grandchildren popped over. That happens on Saturday nights, and they live right next door, so I'm very fortunate that way. We do have a third one on the way now, so we're very excited about that.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's different when you're on that realm. Everybody said it is different when you become a grandfather, and it truly is. I've been married to the same gal since I met her at 15 years old in high school. But believe it or not, she sat at a lunch table with a girl I used to like. I was friends with that girl's brothers, and somehow we just, we dated for a couple weeks, and then I met Donna and went roller skating with her one night, and the rest is history. And we've been together. It's going to be 38 years of marriage in February and 43 being together. So
that's awesome, dude.
A long time. Yeah. So I always say I'm unofficially retired now. I had some health issues because of what I did for a living. Some of it was, unfortunately, we have hereditary issues in our lives sometimes that come along, and had a life-changing event for me. I was a contractor for a lot of years, and one day I suffered partial paralysis from the waist down, and thank God it came back, but within 3 weeks I found myself in major back surgery, and it changed my life. So I always look at it as one door closing, but another one opening, and the reason I say that is because that's how I found this community. I started out with, I have a little reselling business. These are more of pastimes, but I do love computers. I started building computers again for myself, and then it spiraled where people would ask me to either build one for them or fix theirs or that kind of thing. And, on BDLL, we've had a lot of discussions about Windows and Microsoft and the business models and things like that. And quite frankly, that's what pushed me over to Linux. I've known about Linux for quite some time. I've had it on a couple of machines. And I thought, let me take a look at it again. And I did. And I'm on it 99.9% of my time now, I think. And but I think the biggest thing that's come out of this is the community and the sense of belonging to something, and this, for me being my person, I've become a geek at almost 60 years old, if you can imagine that. So, I mean,
it's never too late, dude.
Yeah. That's the fun of this. It's I think it's the fact that anybody can learn something new at any age. I've always loved electronics. When I was a kid, we used to tear transistor radios apart and Frankenstein something together. And so, I just have always had an interest in this. And, my life here right now is just, it's being grandpa, and it's, trying to just, go day by day with things as, because again, health issues do get in the way sometimes, but so I try to keep myself busy in other ways. Right now, I always tell people, when whatever's left up here, let me offer that to people, whatever I can. And I think that's where, being on BDLL and being part of this community helps too, because number one, I'm learning a lot. personally. But I'm also feel like, I have some things to offer, that maybe like other people, there's always a little bit here, a little bit there, and you put it together and you got a whole package. So,
Yep. I think everybody has something to offer. I don't care how technical you think you are or how untechnical you think you are. I think everybody has something to offer.
yes. Well, to me, I think I've always felt this way. You may come in with an opinion on something, and it could be a strong opinion. But the beauty of diversity of the people that belong to this, not only just from men and women, but also from worldwide. When you look at, the amount of people that come on Biddle every night or every Saturday, and you can talk through something, and then your opinion might soften, might change. Maybe yours does the same for somebody else. But it's a meeting of the minds, and it's the willingness to be open-minded and to learn. And um, I was like every other kid. I didn't want to be in high school. I wanted to get out. I couldn't wait to get into the world. And then all I did was want to go back and learn things. And it's kind of interesting, whether it was in a classroom or whether it was in a platform like this. And I enjoy meeting people. I am a talker, as you know, and you've seen that before. And as the show has grown, you got to try to remember that, because you don't want to take away from somebody else. But as far as me, I'm a Knight of Columbus, for what, through our parish. And I think a lot of those things, I used to belong to a lot of different things, even with the builders associations. And I always tried to give back. I always believe in paying it forward. I'm the type of person standing in line, see a military person in uniform, or even out of uniform. They're not hard to distinguish because of the way they talk. It's yes, sir, ma'am, that kind of thing. And if I see them purchasing something, a lot of times I'll pay for it, or I'll buy them a meal, because it's my way of giving back to them, for their service and for what we have here and the freedoms to be able to do the things we want.
Yep. Well, you mentioned that you do computers on the side. You have grandkids. Do you have time for any other hobbies?
I do actually, through my reselling business. Again, it's people say, well, what do you sell? It's like anything else. It's you sell anything that maybe you can make a couple of dollars on. But what I've tended to focus on is a passion of mine from when I was a kid. I discovered Hot Wheels all over again, if you can imagine that. The Sweet 16s, I was probably 8 or 9 years old when they first came out. When I was a young boy, I bet 300 plus Hot Wheels and Matchbox and Tootsie Toys and all those. And through being a kid, my dad punished me by taking them away, because we decided to take our Tonka toys and have a crash up derby, which were brand new, and gave them to my cousins. It's kind of funny, and then it's not, because now I look at what some of these are worth in today's world. There are some of them that are 5 and 6 figures, if you can imagine a little 1/64th car being worth that. So I'm starting a collection all over again for myself and my grandchildren. My grandson especially, he loves Hot Wheels. And then I do buy and resell some of them too. Again, it's just more of, that's kind of my hobby. I would like to turn it into a little bit more than that. I watch a lot of restoration videos. There's some guys on there that will do amazing things. They'll do paint jobs better than like candy paint jobs and things like that. If you can imagine a little car. And so I'd like to eventually start doing that too, when I can set up a little space for it. But that's about as close as I can get to a hobby anymore. But that's about it. And then just playing with my grandkids.
Well, I'm sure they take up a lot of time, man.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You deal with people through computers on a regular basis. I'm sure you deal with Windows as well. But are people in your local area receptive to Linux?
Some are. I do get probably the same blanket answer with a lot of people. Either they never heard of it, or they are a little bit on the dismissive side because it's something new to learn all over again. I do notice that since Windows XP, when Windows XP ended life, I sold a lot of computers with Linux on them because people were afraid of Windows 10. They didn't want to make the jump to Windows 7. They said if they're going to learn something new, they wanted something that, was kind of fresh start, and they were open-minded at the point. But now that I think Windows 10 has been out for a while, people getting kind of used to it, it's kind of the same way, a little on the dismissive side. Although, because of the woes of Windows 10 with a lot of things, their updates causing issues, I'm starting to see more of an interest in finding something else. And I do have a lot of people asking me about more and more about Linux. So I think it's going to start, through Microsoft's business model and the way they've been doing things lately. I think it's also going to help Linux in the sense of growth.
You mean with like a service model?
Yeah, I think with the fact that, more and more people might be open-minded to having it as a daily driver on their computer. I think we've all said this. We've had this conversation that, the first thing is, can I edit my photos? Can I browse online? Can I do a lot of the basic stuff? And that's the blanket, absolutely yes. But I also think that there's a misconception that you cannot do more advanced work on this. Now, granted, Adobe tools and some of the other design software out there, that's geared toward a Microsoft product or Windows or even Mac, it's going to be much more challenging to try to do those types of projects. So we've said this before, you have the tool for the job. If you need Windows, you have Windows. The computer right here behind me, that's a Windows computer. It's not that I want to be on it or run it. I keep it offline. I went back old school. Back in the 90s, before the internet came out, you bought a computer, you bought the software you need, you did your work. So that's how I treat this one. I need it because of the accounting software I do and the occasional design work that I do sometimes for people. Other than that, it doesn't get turned on. I just have no reason to use it. And I have not had like a lot of people, maybe the energy or wherewithal to go learn GNU Cache yet. I have been very curious about it, but my biggest concern is having it migrate over to my accountant.
Right.
To transfer that. Yes, you can give them a P&L or a spreadsheet, but then that also means more work for them, where now I just take my information, put it on a flash drive, plug it in, and they just basically restore it, and they're looking at my computer in essence, so it's the tool for the job. But I really, other than that, have no reason to not be on Linux. I'm looking to do more. They have senior fairs here and local type things that you can do that I was thinking I'd bring a couple computers out to and start showing people, because when people touch and feel, we're visual beings. I think you tend to see and learn more that way, and the curiosity spikes, and the interest.
It definitely, for me, everybody's different, obviously, but I think a lot of people are that way, where I know from myself I am, where it's just, if I see it, it's way better than if I just hear about it.
Right. It's funny. I was at, this is almost 2 years ago now, when we bought these Apple phones. Everybody in my family has them. And I have my frustrations with that too from time to time. But while we were waiting up at the Apple store, which I ultimately didn't buy it from there because I didn't know you had to have an appointment hours ahead of time. But I started mentioning Linux, and all of a sudden, 3 employees that were standing there talking to other people turned around and struck up a conversation with me. They were in the middle of servicing other people and started chatting about Linux. It was the most fascinating thing. And the same thing with Best Buy. I walked in there and I see they have it all across the back of the store, windows up there. And they say, can I help you? Is there anything you need? And I said, yeah, you could change that sign and put Linux up there. And the kids started laughing. But we struck up a conversation the same way and just started talking about it for quite some time. So,
well, that's how it starts out, man.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to your beginning, Joe, with computers. Where did you start with computers? What was the first computer you used?
It was back in, I'm thinking the earlier mid-90s. I had an Acer 486. I don't remember a lot about the specs. I remember, for whatever reason, 256 megabytes of RAM at the time. It didn't have much for RAM. It had probably maybe a 4 or 6 gig hard drive or whatever it was at the time. It was very small, but I literally had no clue. I remember when I bought that, because I was starting my contracting business, I needed to have, some means of being able to do billing and invoicing versus doing it on a spreadsheet the way I did it anymore. I always did it by hand on this big long spreadsheet. And it just got to be a little bit cumbersome. So I bought this computer. I spent $2,500. I'll never forget that, for
that computer,
a printer, monitor, and keyboard and all that. And then I happened to find a friend. This gal worked through one of my subcontractors at an electrical business, and her husband was really into computers. And he helped get me started on a lot of the software and installing. And I'll never forget putting the 3.5-inch floppy in, or the 5.25-inch floppy in to load stuff. And Windows was this big box back then of disks and stuff. If you had to restore it, and you could literally start the computer, walk out, get a cup of coffee, talk to your family for a few minutes, whatever. Come back half an hour later, it was still booting up.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
But from there, it kind of spawned into just upgrading and buying new systems. I tended to buy Dell most of the time, and I'd buy them maybe every 3 years. I did buy an HP one time from, I think it was Best Buy, and I remember the power supply went on that. I fixed that, and then I was starting to hear more and more about Linux, and I believe it was Ubuntu 6.06. It wasn't 04, it was 06 back then, I believe, was the first one I put on back in 96, I believe.
Well, how did, you said you heard it, but where did you hear it from? Like, is there people just talking around you, or what?
No, actually, in reflecting back, it was, when I say hear about it, I used to buy a lot of different magazines for home improvement and computer stuff. And in there was one of them, I think was Computer World or something to that effect. And they used to give you, they put a disc in and they'd have articles on different things. And I remember they used to put the Ubuntu discs in, kind of stuck to the page, and to have you try it. And that was more of a demo disc. But the funny thing about this is when you wanted to do an install, you had to have a Windows computer back then, because you literally had to take a CD and you had to compile it, so to speak. You had to get different packages from different places. That's kind of when the internet started coming into place. And then you had to have the Woobi installer, which was an exe file, and put that all together. So you had to do that on your Windows computer in order to create this disk, or at least that's how I did it back then. So it was very daunting, and I remember trying Fedora. I think it was 10. Was my first experience with Fedora, which looks nothing like it does today.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So, and I actually really liked Fedora back then. So it was a lot of fun. And I kept that HP computer for, I bet you, another 3-4 years because of Linux.
So you had no reservations about trying Linux. You were into it.
Not at all. That's the thing. Not that I want to jump off a cliff, but a lot of us do. We try things and you're like, oh, I wish I could go back. But I've always been the curious type, and if you break something, you learn how to fix it. That was advice I received at a very young age, even for my business or whatever. If you don't know how to fix something, find out how to fix it. If you don't know where to find out, ask somebody who does.
Yep.
So,
well, you said Ubuntu was one of the first ones you tried. Do you remember how that experience was? Was it a good experience, or was there a lot of issues with it that first time?
From what I remember, I don't recall having a lot of big issues. The biggest challenge, I think, for Linux, and it still holds true today, is getting used to the names of the software, what they do. The software was a little bit different. I don't think the software back then was anywhere near as nice as it is now, of course. Now it looks like a lot like the Microsoft products you would put on a machine. It wasn't as polished, I guess, as, because XP, that was one of the things about XP. I remember when XP came out, it was such a different change from my first experience was 3.0, Windows 3.0. And I can still envision the changes coming about from a visual standpoint. But I remember when XP came out and their claim to being a more secure operating system, but a lot of the features they had, just the simple fact of being able to put a long file name in was huge, because you were limited to so many characters on the previous versions. And I don't remember ever having those limitations with Ubuntu. It just was a more simple operating system, and I used it for the basics. I used it for getting online, or I used it for, maybe some Word documents and things like that. It was just a secondary machine for the kids maybe to do some homework on and that kind of thing too. And they did fine with it.
So how long does it take you to if it's like that in that use case, how long does it take you to get to the point where you're using it full time?
Well, I kind of veered away from it, so to speak. I didn't purposely not use it anymore. It's like when that machine was gone, I stuck with Windows for quite some time, and it was probably 3, 4 years ago now. I have to think back because I think it's been a few years since I've known you, and that's kind of
Yep.
right around that time when I decided to go full time on this 100%. And I think it was actually starting back in 2015 when XP was going away and Windows 10 was coming out, and I had heard about the potential data mining and then the forced update or the notices popping up when you see it on the newscast, and all of a sudden it pops up your Windows needs to be upgraded. I made the decision then to start trying to go on it more often and maybe see if I could make the transition over 100%. And that's what was the tipping point for me. Looking back now, I almost wish I would have done it even sooner because I've been very, very happy with it ever since I've come on it. I almost feel kind of not out of place, but it's funny. You used to run Windows and then you'd come and you try Linux, and Linux felt a little odd. Now it's the other way around. It almost feels funny going back on Windows when I do.
I feel kind of lost, dude, when I don't think I booted into Windows. Like, I don't even think I was in Windows at all this week at all. Because like I said, all I do is boot in, play a game that doesn't run on Linux, and boot out of it. So, but I feel so like a noob on Windows 10 because I was really familiar with Windows 7, XP all the way back. Like I was really familiar with the settings. I could edit the registry. I could do all of the things that a power user would do, and I have like lost that by not keeping myself familiar with Windows, specifically in Windows 10. So I mean, it's nice, but I just feel out of place. Yeah.
Well, that's very true. Even myself, when I go into Windows, my sister, when I went down to Florida, as you know, I had to go down there because my dad had become ill. And I spent nearly a month down there this past summer. And while I was down there, she knew it was getting to be time to upgrade because they have a business down there. And so she asked me to upgrade a couple of computers for them and her husband. And they needed to go to Windows 10, and I did. And I told them, I said, I don't know everything about the system. I try to stay apprised for it because when I do need to help or fix things. But I did make up my mind that in building new systems in the future moving forward this past year that I was not going to build any more Windows computers unless it was maybe strictly for family or something like that. But even at that, it was either with a Linux on it or no operating system at all, and let them load it themselves. Not that I wouldn't support it as far as hardware and that kind of thing, but I like the fact that there's, like System 76 and Zarizen and all these different companies now, and Pinebook, all of them. They're starting. Some of them are starting to embrace Linux more, but there's only those handful that are out there that do it 100%. That's what they do. And I thought, if I'm going to build systems to resell, which I don't do a lot of them. I want to do it that way. I want to be one of those that, I can get somebody a computer. Ironically, one of the last ones I sold, it was to a professor out at some college that wanted to put Windows 10 on it, and he knew he wasn't, he got it for a good price because the Windows price wasn't built into it. And
right.
He put Windows on it. He had a free copy from the college. So, but I did send him the flash drive with the Linux distro that I loaded on it, which happened to be Ubuntu. So that if he ever wanted to reinstall or whatever, he would have it. And I do put a partition on there. The only thing I could ever do with Windows here to customize it, was the boot. I hated on Windows 7 that ugly flower type blue screen wallpaper. So I would go in and I'd put my own business wallpaper in there, or I'd put, the backgrounds or things like that. And I did mess with the registry a little bit, but I never got into it as much as I think I have on Linux here because I think there's more versatility within Linux than within Windows, because you break something in Windows, it's pretty serious.
Well, do you use Mac at all?
I do not. My sons do, and my son-in-law. I still have my son's 2012 MacBook Pro here. that I really do need to sell it for him because that was the original intention. He had dropped it and he thought it was kind of totally broken, and I was able to get it going again. But in the meantime, I decided to see if I could put Linux on it, and I fought with this thing for a long time. And as I mentioned on Biddle last night, the one way I discovered to put it on here was I grabbed one of the old DVDs out of there and just I said, let me try a DVD because a flash drive wasn't working. And sure enough, I got Linux Mint running on it. Now I've since, of course, put it back to the Mac OS on here. We're going to sell it, but I'm not. I think the only thing that I like about Mac is because it's the system, the core system was built off of Unix, and which is basically Linux. And when you look at the file system, there's familiarity there now. Even my own desktop, I never thought I would ever go from the taskbar on the bottom to putting it up on the top. I've got that up there, and I've got Cairo Dock on the bottom. And I remember when I had my cable company out here several months ago to do some tweaking on my service, the guy was a gamer. We just started talking, and I showed him the system. He goes, "Oh, you got a Mac?" Because the way the screen looked. I said, "No, it's actually Linux." And I showed him, and he was just so fascinated with that. So
being a part of Biddle, you obviously test a lot of distros out. So right. You are a distro hopper, but what about your main machine? Is that something you switch often, or you just stick with one to be stable?
Yeah, I don't switch anymore like I used to. I do have 2 drives in here. I've got Linux Mint 19.2 right now is the one I'm on. That's my daily driver. I really liked what they've done with it, especially when they came out with a new theme in the 19 version. I did not go without my problems with this. Initially, I kept having these freeze ups, which is typical of a lot of the different distros. There might be one little thing here or there, and I discovered that I needed a firmware update or a BIOS, flash on my motherboard, which seems to have overall corrected it. I haven't really had any, knock on wood, issues with it since. I do run Peppermint 10 on a little cube computer I built. It's a little 6x6x3. I use that as a workstation for my eBay business, my resale business, and my computer stuff. And then the other drive in here, I have Pop OS. And now I am not a huge GNOME fan like I was. I did like it before. It was pretty and flashy, but there's something about Pop that the way they did it that I do like it. And it has saved me a couple times when I've messed up a couple things on Mint where I've had as a matter of fact, one night on Biddle, I was on and things just locked. And I came back. It was right toward the end of the show. I made it back for the after show, but I had to boot up into my Pop OS in order to do it. So I have learned now, too, I've got some SSDs I'm going to be getting to clone this drive because I have this system set up exactly like I want it. And if I ever do something to it where I can't get it back, I want to be able to just pull a drive and just put it in there. And you can't do that with any of the other ones. And I think that's in itself makes it worth being on Linux because of the versatility that you can pull a drive out, put it in another machine, and get up and go. Now, does that hold true with every piece of hardware? Not necessarily. I have a newer machine. If I'm going to go into something that's 12 years old, it's a coin toss, as you know, whether it'll work or not. So,
yeah, more than likely, Linux has no issues with that, but there are times where it will, depending on the hardware. So you said you run Linux Mint 19.2, so that means you run Cinnamon?
I do.
Okay, so what do you like about Cinnamon over the other desktop environments like KD Plasma and XFCE?
Well, at first I didn't care for their menu setup and I think it was the theming more than anything else. But I've really gotten used to it because we all use the word workflow, and I guess workflow means different things for different people. To me, I am a start menu, Windows button, whatever you want to call it. We know it, it's a super key, or whatever. For terminology, but I like to hit the button, bring the menu down, or go to my taskbar on the bottom. My dock. But I like the fact that if I want to go turn something on, turn it off, it's just simple radio buttons. It's not a lot of effort to do that. If I want to find something, I hit my super key and boom, I just I start typing and it brings up what I want. The other thing that I like to use, I was never, unless I absolutely had to be, in the terminal on Windows. And it was usually I had customer service help because something was wrong. I use Quake on here all the time, and I have it set up on the bottom where I hit the F12 key, it brings it up, and I like to be able to see, my stats on there. So I use NeoFetch to be able to look at that. I've installed that on here. And then the beauty of doing whatever I want through the terminal. So, but Cinnamon is just, I do like the XFCE version of this too, but there's something about the Cinnamon desktop that just works for me. And not because it's Windows-like, it's because of the ease of getting to the things I want when I need them quickly.
Right. Well, their settings manager is really well done. They have that perfect balance between just enough settings and not so many overwhelming amount of settings.
Right.
And they have like the right settings, if you want to say that. So yeah, I do like Cinnamon.
Well, and I've liked Kubuntu too, and it's very similar to this, but to that point, and I'm not going to say it's a downside. It's whatever you want out of it. I like the idea that there's a distro out there that, man, if you really want to do a whole bunch more to it, you can. And Kubuntu or KDE, the Plasma does. I mean, you can do a ton with that stuff, even more. But it can also be overwhelming where you look for the same thing in 3 or 4 different places.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you like. And, there's been a lot of comments about this distro, just like Peppermint, maybe being Frankenstein together with a bunch of pieces from other distros. I don't see anything wrong with that. We had that conversation last night on Biddle, how there's always the one thing seems to be in another distro that you'd like to have here. And yeah, it'd be great if you could take all those things yourself and put them together. And a lot of times you can add stuff into other distros from other ones, as you know, by packages, but not all of them work well together. So there's never going to be the absolute perfect distro. And I think for this one, I had Mate for a long time, and Mate is very similar to this. But the theming is what really brought me over when they went to this new theme, because quite honestly, I started thinking that their theme was getting rather ugly for a while there, and it was old, and
it was outdated, and they needed updating.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So, are you like an AMD guy or an Nvidia guy, or do you care?
I'm not hardcore either one. I want what works, but right now, I think more so because of cost and the fact that their performance has gotten better and things. I do have an AMD processors in most of my machines. The last Intel machine I had that I sold off from a gaming standpoint was my i7 4770K. There was nothing wrong with the machine, but I wanted to upgrade, and I built this one. This has got a AMD Ryzen 1600 in it. I have another ITX machine I'm going to build to replace this Windows one. That's got a FX AMD. I'm going to be putting in a Ryzen 2700, but the workstation is a Kaby Lake i5. So that's an Intel. But from a Nvidia, I'm still running my old 6-year-old GTX 760 in this, which I am looking to maybe get at least a 1660 Ti. Years ago, I had to have the biggest, baddest, latest, greatest. Now I want something that's going to be beefy enough to do what I want and bad enough to do what I want, but it doesn't have to be the most expensive and most powerful out there.
Right. Well, it doesn't have to be the most expensive, but two, that also, when you're running that latest technology, comes with issues. Regardless if it's Nvidia or AMD, when you're running that latest, you sometimes have to wait for kernel patches or driver updates for things to actually work the way they're supposed to. So it's not always best to have it the latest.
Yeah, that was commented on last night by Dave too about, because he likes to have the latest kernels and different things. And that's fine. I was kind of starting going down that road until I broke my distro. And I thought, maybe it's time to just let the distro move up as it needs to instead of hard pushing it, because we do know that, like, even with the kernels may not always be paired up with the hardware yet. And it's the same thing when we found even with these manufacturers, whether it's AMD or Intel, pushing something out too early, and the motherboard companies maybe they weren't quite ready, and all of a sudden they're having issues and they got to push out a firmware patch. So it's kind of the same principle. It's okay to want to have the latest and greatest and best, but like you just said, it's not necessarily always the most, you know, uh, comfortable situation to be in from it running well either. That doesn't mean it's always going to run perfectly.
Right. Well, I think that's why being in Linux is awesome, because everybody has their choice. If you want to run Linux Mint, there's Linux Mint that will be stable for you. If Dave wants to run the latest kernel, it's there for him to use, and he's capable of fixing anything that comes up if he's running the latest kernel. But we have that option. We have that choice. And I think that's the best thing.
Yeah. The other thing that's been really fun with this community, and we've done it ourselves, Mr. Sniper Man here. We've gone into ballistic overkill after a show or something, and 10 of us will jump in and take over a server, and we have a great time.
Yep.
When you think about, like I said, 10 years sounds like a long time, but it really wasn't that long ago. And you think about how much Linux has gained in stride to come to where it is already. And even from the kernel standpoint, when you look at the difference between 4.15 and up to 5 and how quickly those versions have been rolled out lately. And I think they're making a more hard-pressed effort to get them out quicker and hopefully, still quality to be able to run these things, because there is some promise on the horizon for this. I think there's a lot of potential for Linux, and I think if you, again, 10 years ago, if you mentioned the word Linux, people would look at you like a deer in the headlights. And speaking about it in my community, when you asked me earlier, you don't see that as often anymore. Yes, you still have people say I've never heard of it, but I find that far less than what it used to be. And I know people are more open for it too.
Yeah, I think you find it because I surely find it around people around me. But you're right, it is less than it used to be. And if you look at just even take one thing like the installers for Linux now compared to just even 5 years ago, 2 years ago, they're light years ahead of what they were. You can install a distro in 10 minutes and be up and running. That didn't happen years ago. So yeah, we have come a long way, and it's awesome.
Well, one of the best things about Linux for me, also from a computer side of working on things, I fixed a lot of people's computers using Linux. Many times they've gotten a virus, they can't get the computer to boot, it's boot looping, or it just won't boot at all, and they're worried about getting their files off. And I'll boot up into a distro on their machine and be able to access their files, pull them off, wipe their drive, and then reinstall it, and no harm, no foul. You just have to reinstall their programs and things like that. So that's the other nice thing too, is if you don't want to install it and you just want to run it just to see what it's like and play with it, you can do that and run it right from a USB. If you're worried about security, you can run a live, a distro off of that. And as soon as you log out, you're done. It's like you were never there. You don't leave a footprint. There's a whole list, as long as my arm, I think, that's grown of the things you can do with this now. And it's awareness. We've had a discussion about marketing, Linux not doing great marketing. And we also discussed that, is that the right term? I think it's more the awareness. I don't even want to use the word necessarily promotion, because promotion is part of marketing now. You have Dell, you have Lenovo, you have some of these other companies that are starting to put Linux on the machines. That's where I think the marketing needs to be done better, to let people know it's an option and have them on the shelf. And I like to think that's coming down the pike, because we're seeing more of them coming out. But I think it's an awareness thing. We need to do a better job with awareness. And I think BDLL and Destination Linux and Tux Digital and the list goes on of all the people that we've become friends with that have their channels. That's where it starts, and they're doing a great job with that. We've also heard how the Linux community can be hostile. I myself have never, fortunately, experienced that, although I do know that there's some places that I see it, like on social media, where somebody will really ask for help to get themselves in a bind, and because they're new, and you get these memes and people coming back with some nasty comments trying to be funny, and that's the side I don't like. but that's, I still think, a small percentage compared to the overall community.
Yep. Well, you had mentioned workflow earlier, and you said that you're a super key kind of guy. That's hardware related. And speaking of that, but speaking of software, what kind of software do you need to have on your computer to run?
Well, I run LibreOffice. God, I may have to look. I've got so much, but I do use GIMP a lot. I use Krita, a lot of the editing software where it comes to the graphical things. I have Raw Therapy on here, although I don't use it as much as I'd like to. I know Darktable's another one. I do more because of my eBay business too, and with the computer stuff and design work. I like to have things that I can control editing and that sort of thing. I used to do websites from scratch in the Adobe Dreamweaver setup, so I'm going to be using more of like Joomla or something like that. But I also have Bluefish on here because I'd like to look and see and maybe about doing something that again too. But that's not a must. It's more for me. I have to have the graphical editing software, the Office type software. Of course, my games. I'm not a hardcore gamer, but I do like the game, so I like to have that on here. I like Steam, and one of these days we're going to do Super Tux with everybody too that we haven't talked about. I'd like to learn Lutris a little bit too, but yeah, as far as for me, my needs have changed a lot from what they used to be from years ago. I do use spreadsheets from time to time and that sort of thing too. So nothing super special, outstanding, but I have the media software on here like you guys have, only because I'd like to learn it eventually.
Right.
Like whether it's OBS or Kdenlive and that sort of thing. And I want to be able to put short videos together on my websites eventually. So,
well, you mentioned Adobe and a few other things. Is there any software that's not currently available in Linux that you say this would be awesome if it came to Linux?
Yes, one that I absolutely love is SketchUp. SketchUp. When I did ramp work years ago, for disability type work, there was nothing out there that would draw a ramp because you have angles that you have to go up with and rise and runs and all that. And I went back in 2004, I went to a remodeler show in Chicago at McCormick Place. And I not only bought SketchUp, but I bought SoftPlan at the time. And SoftPlan has since built in some capabilities with it too. But the beauty of SketchUp is it doesn't draw like your typical CAD program. It's basically a modeling software. It's very much like SolidWorks, I think is the name of it.
Okay.
Where it's basically you draw a square, you bring it up into a box, you do cutouts, you can draw anything from scratch. You could even take a photograph of a building, which I've done, and superimpose this over the top of it. And I know that there's older versions that'll run within Wine, but it doesn't run the latest one. And that is one piece of software that I would definitely love to see come over to this. And that's Google owned now.
Yep.
So maybe there's a chance.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I hear all the time that Google loves Linux, just like Microsoft loves Linux. And they do put a lot of effort into the actual code and stuff like that. But they don't seem to care a whole lot about bringing like specific software over to Linux. So you may be holding your breath, dude.
I know. I think it comes down to them seeing a need and being able to monetize it somehow, and obviously you pay for the program as it is. And if they saw that there was enough demand for it, or people asking for it from the Linux side, I think you'd have a better chance, but who knows how often that's happening. So you're right. Yeah. And again, that's where unfortunately, I got to stay with the Windows machine. I shouldn't say unfortunately, but I do look at that way because I really want to be 100% on this and not have to do it ever again.
Yep.
Who knows?
So stepping back and taking a broad look at the landscape, Joe, where does Linux stand at in your mind?
As far as where it is now, where it could be, you're saying? Is that
where is it headed to? I mean, where are we going to be?
I don't know that anybody could say for sure where it's going to be. Where I'd like it to be is I'd like to see it more on the desktop. There's a fear I have of it actually growing too much in popularity. I've said this too. As much as I'd like to see more people using it, my concern is then the target on its back will grow bigger from hackers and that sort of thing. So
It
there's a
will.
side to me. Yeah, we see it already with some things. So there's a side to me that almost would like to keep it a little bit more on the comfortable, smaller side. But I do think you're going to see more of it out there. I do believe firmly eventually you're going to see it sitting on a store shelf somewhere as it gets more popular and grows. The desktop wasn't even a thing years ago. A handful of us knew about it, but it really wasn't a thing. And most people don't realize it's been around for years already in their radios of their cars and now the smart refrigerators and radio stations and all the commercial enterprise aspects of it. You never even realize it was there. But I could see Linux with communities like this and platforms like this growing more because of this. And also, people want choice. I mean, if we can do a good enough job to get the word out that people have a choice, that's going to make all the difference in the world. And I'm a diehard optimist when it comes to this. I'd rather believe that than the worst. And I have also expressed my reservations about Microsoft's motive for wrapping their arms around Linux. We've been reassured, well, Linux is, protected and it's so big, but, there's a lot of things that happen in the corporate world that a lot of us may never see or understand. And so from that standpoint, I'm probably a little bit of a pessimist, but I am an eternal optimist when it comes to Linux growing and getting more familiar and being out there more than what it is even now.
Well, you said earlier about companies and, you mentioned the communities, but I think getting companies like System 76, Dell, all of these bigger major competitors in the market to promote Linux, then we don't have to actually promote it like a salesman. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can just talk about it like it's a great thing, and we're just talking about it. But let the companies like Dell do the major heavy lifting with the actual promotion of it. And when you see a company like Dell put out Linux computers on their website and allow that to be a choice, it's a great thing, because, you said, well, people want a choice. They do want a choice if they know there is a choice. A lot of people don't even know there's a choice. So when you start having projects like the Sputnik project with Dell, that's when I think that it will take off.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's why I said from a marketing standpoint, that's where the marketing needs to be done. Or from people like me, if I'm going to be building Linux computers, and I put on my social media page, I put Black Friday's coming by, and I put on there basically what I offer, and that they come with Linux or they come with a blank drive, and if you want to load your own OS, which can save you between $100 and $200 if you stay with Linux, a lot of times that might pique somebody's interest too if they think they could save some money, because that's what a lot of times it comes down to. But from a marketing standpoint, until we start seeing them, you see Chromebooks all the time being advertised. But if they stressed that it was more open source or explain to people what it was, that would help. It's like what you're saying, like Dell, if they say, you can have, the free OS, it's technically, we know if you wanted to push the shove that it's not an operating system, even though that's what it does. If you want to get technical about what Linux really is.
I try not to get technical, Jeff.
Right. Yeah.
It gives me a headache.
Exactly. So, and pardon the phrase, but we have to the marketing almost has to be, I don't want to say dumbed down. That's not politically correct, but I said it. But it has to be put on a level that the average person can understand. When you put it
I
out.
think they need to be informed about the fact that they have that choice and why they would want that choice. Like, right. I talk to people who don't even care. They don't even care what system they run, as long as they can check their emails, view YouTube videos or Netflix, they're fine.
Right.
But when you get to the point where you can help them see that, hey, this choice over here might not just be another choice. It might even be better than what you have. That's when I think we will, and that's not a situation where one of us can change. That's gradually over time that we talk to people. We do things together as a community, and then, like I said, projects like Sputnik and System 76, all together pushing in one direction, will allow people to see there is another choice, and maybe I do want that choice.
Well, and even like when you look at which Total OS today, Carmine, he's done a great job talking about the sweet spot. Well, now here you've got Pinebook Pro and Pinebook coming out with $200 machines. Are they going to be the fastest, rip-roaring machines? No, they're an entry level, get it out there. And I think as those machines start getting into the hands of people, because the problem with like Dell right now is XPS. That's not a cheap machine, even with Linux on it. So you have to have that entry level system with this on there sitting next to a Windows machine. And you have to have the staff that are selling the machines educated enough to know about it. And they don't have to know everything about it. I don't know everything about it, and that's why I say when you talk about the terminology here, GIMP, people don't realize it's a mile-long name, a GNU image manipulation program. So a lot of times, well, what is that? So now we're starting to see more and more posts about alternative software to the things that people know. And the nice thing about it is it does work on both platforms. It does work on Windows if somebody wants to try it out. Unfortunately, though, I do know this, even like from my wife's Windows computers, it doesn't open up anywhere near as quick as it does on Linux. It's because it's geared for Linux, basically, the open source.
Well, I think you hit a great point, and that is that there needs to be that entry-level computer as well, because that's why Chromebooks are so popular. They're basically throwaways that people can buy, and that's why the schools use them, because they're cheap and they're easy. And I think that Pinebook could fill that area if they get the traction rolling for what they're doing. I think what they're doing is great, but we need it to gain traction somehow in like the major media outlets in order for that to happen. So.
Well, absolutely. And even the machines that I build, when I put Linux on them, not all of them even state that they're compatible with Linux, the components. It's almost like put them in there and hope it works. And so far, knock on wood, I haven't hit anything that has given me a problem working on here. But I do notice that more hardware, when you look at what it's compatible with, does talk about how it supports Linux. It doesn't say specifically which one, because as we know, Linux has got over 1,000 distros or whatever out there, but there are some that are probably geared more toward enterprise and that kind of thing. But the fact that it'll run the open source software is huge. That many people don't realize if you're going to buy and build a system, it is very easy, but you still need to do due diligence. Not even from a Linux standpoint, but even just the hardware itself, that it all talks nice to each other. And then Linux is just the cherry on the cake, so to speak.
So have you ever, like when you were in Best Buy, talking to that guy, did you ever talk to him about actually looking at Linux in the store?
I told him, because he said he's tried loading Linux on a couple of machines or see if he could run them. He says, I just can't get them to recognize or open. I said, have you gone in and adjusted the BIOS? I said, many times you have to turn, the secure boot and off and legacy on and whatever. He goes, no, I don't know how to do that. And I said, well, you want me to come in? I'll be glad to show you.
Let me bring my USB in and show you.
Exactly. I told him, I said, I'll bring one in if you can talk your supervisor and let us at least, boot it up on here. You don't even have to load it to show you what it can do. I'd be glad to do it. So yes, I've had that conversation. Now, whether it would actually happen or not, I don't know. I've had the same thing at Office Depot over here. I talked to the guy over there one time too. And the funny thing is they're receptive to it, but it's still the higher ups that got to say, yeah, okay.
Yeah, they don't want to get fired either.
No. So, but it would be funny, I think, to do that, or just,
we'd have a group of people around watching the install of Linux. It would be awesome.
Or even just running it off the USB. Even if you didn't install it, just looking at it and running off that and go, okay, pull it up and boot it up and watch it's right back on what it was to start out with. They go, wow,
Right.
Uh,
Well, Joe, there's many reasons to run Linux. Community is one of the best reasons to run Linux, but there's other reasons, open source software, flexibility, customization. What is the reason that you run Linux?
First and foremost, I think is for the choice of it, to be able to choose what I want, do what I want with it, and also to have some peace of mind. And we know when you get on the internet, nothing's private, but the fact that I'm not worrying about them forcing an update on me that's potentially could break the machine. I can choose when to update, what I want to update, all that stuff. It's the first time in today's world that I think that I can honestly feel like I have a true choice in something. We can't choose how much gas is when we go to the gas pumps. We can't choose our heating costs for our homes. And, I could go down the list. This is one of the rare, and it is really rare things that we have total freedom and choice with. And I relish and so much appreciate all the developers, no matter how big or how little the distro is, because those people are giving of their time, and they're not really asking for anything except if you want to support them, you can. They're welcome it, because somebody's got to pay for this somewhere along the line. But a lot of times, it's just being done out of the passion for it, and
Yep.
It's been the first time in a long time that I felt so passionate about anything. And then also the friendships that have come out of this has been amazing. We've never met face to face. We came close, but I couldn't
Came
make
close.
the self. Yeah. But maybe one day we will. But I feel like I know you, and I feel like I know everybody in the Biddle platform, because we've been doing this for how many, not weeks, years now. And then to find a lot of them don't live too far from me too. So hopefully I'll be seeing Steve's very own, and maybe see Dave one of these days in Milwaukee. I go see my son, or whatever. So it's great to know that we're all over.
Yep. The friendships are one of the best things that comes out of the community. Like we talk about the community, but it's made up of people giving back to the community. It's made up of different areas. But one of the best things about that is I can sit down with you and have a conversation like this, and we're in tune with each other.
Yeah.
And we, the friendships that come out of it is absolutely awesome. So maybe when we do that Biddle meetup somewhere, and we will do that sometime, I hope someday. Yeah, maybe we will get to meet up.
That would be fantastic. I have to laugh a little bit. Probably 3 weeks ago, we're on Biddle, the Linux show, basically. And in the Zoom chat, Daniel was talking about having problems with booting his Windows computer. And we were going back and forth, and I was offering him some help in there. And he ultimately got it going. But it was kind of funny that I was thinking, here, this is the passion. This is what we're driving for. And I'm helping him try to fix his boot up on his Windows system, So, but that's also the beauty of this. Nobody looks cross-eyed at anybody because they do that.
Right.
It's great.
Well, Joe, what has been the overall experience for you in the community? I know you'd mentioned earlier about it, but is it good? You've obviously seen some of the bad things that come out of a community, but what's the overall experience?
The overall experience has been very positive. It's the fact that I have made a lot of friends worldwide. It's not just, a few people here and there. It's a worldwide community of, UK, Sweden, Australia, US, all over. It's been a very, very positive experience. I've learned a ton. I feel like sometimes I don't have enough to bring to the table, but I try to offer whatever I can. I'm more on the hardware side of things. Part of, I referenced early on, about my issue with my partial paralysis when I had with my back. Well, one of the things that also came out of that during the process was I suffered a couple of TIAs, which are mini strokes. And so I have some short-term memory loss. And sometimes I feel bad because I feel like I have to explain myself with that if I repeat myself, so it gets a little embarrassing sometimes, but everybody's been so wonderful and welcoming, and nobody has said, hey, you said that before, or whatever. And I think all of us kind of repeat anyway. As we get older, that's kind of a natural thing.
Yeah, I find myself doing that more often than not. So,
but there's help. When you need help, it's there. That's the nice thing. You're not getting charged for getting on the phone with somebody or whatever, or you can message in Telegram or the discourse, whatever.
Well, I said yesterday on Biddle, and that was the truth. Adam Grubbs, he spent hours with me yesterday getting DaVinci Resolve to work and getting Steam to work right. I mean, hours. And that's not something like he does that for a living. He surely doesn't want to come home and do that at night, but he did. And that is one of the best things about Linux. I'm sorry.
But that's the passion of people. And what this does, I don't know if I could express it any better. There's a passion that goes along with this, and it almost becomes a mission that you want to help somebody, you want to figure that out, because like for me recently, I messed up my cinnamon session on here because I did try an app, and when I took it out, I ran BleachBit to do a cleanup on it, and I knew better, and I ran a cleanup on a section that I normally don't do, and so I must have done something to my cinnamon session, but I kept hearing the Biddle crew, because I think it was Dave, and then somebody else had said on there too, they said, this is what you do, or if you're going to have a problem, try to fix it. There usually is a fix out there. Look at the forums, look at somewhere. So I kept hearing that in the back of my mind, and that's what I did. I kept searching, and finally I came across a thread, which I do intend to put it up in Discourse. I still haven't really made use of that. I hear, and that's on me. But I think if that helps somebody in the future, and it was just a couple of commands in the terminal, because you can boot up basically into the repair mode of the grub very easily when you're booting up, and just go into the terminal and fix it. It was literally 2 lines, and boom, it booted. When it came back, I felt like, holy cow, it was like this big weight and fear went running away. So, and I thought, I cried. I thought, man, I did it, So,
well, so working on computers, just like you said, you mess things up or whatever. Just like that, an exciting problem, or not an exciting problem, a problem that you have turns into an exciting fix because you actually found it. Do you have any other stories like that you wow, I got this fixed?
Well, again, it comes back to the same thing with, when I had a Windows computer for somebody that was, they I don't know what they did. See, the problem is it's human nature to try to fix something sometimes when you shouldn't. And it's hard to backtrack what somebody does. And I remember I had this friend who brought a computer to me and said, oh my God, I got this virus. And then I tried fixing it, and I tried doing this, I tried doing that, and whatever. And I said, well, that doesn't tell me or help me a lot. And whatever they did, they really locked it down. I even had a hard time booting into Linux, but I finally did. And they had thousands of personal photos on there of their family that they had no backups of. And I was able to get all that back off of there. And before I did any of that, I had them get a backup drive. And I said, we'll transfer it onto their right in place and get it done. And they thought it was the most amazing thing, because they said, everybody kept telling me, you just got to wipe your drive. You got to wipe. I said, the minute you'd done that, you'd have lost it forever. I said, and this at least gave me the opportunity to do that. So it's, I don't have a ton of amazing stories, but that, it's those little things that I've done that even with Windows years ago. I remember there was something that happened to my system that I had partitions, and they always say, well, partitions doesn't matter. If you have a problem on a drive, you lose them all. I didn't. I had 4 partitions on a drive. And sure enough, I had something get corrupt on my drive, and it had my accounting on it. I didn't sleep all night, and I finally was able to retrieve that partition with one of my backups on it to pull my system back for my accounting. that was a scary lesson to be learned. And I can't remember exactly how I did it, but I got it back. And it was this overwhelming relief of just melting away, thinking, man, what am I going to do the next time? And I think Linux now actually takes a lot of fear away because there's a lot of things you can do with it.
Well, you said it's not an amazing story, but it may not be an amazing story to us, but to that person that you were doing it for, I guarantee you it was amazing.
Yeah.
So, but this is your friendly PSA reminder to back up your system. There you go.
Yeah. Well, and that's why too, with cloning the drive, I plan on cloning, a couple of copies of this drive, because I don't want to start over. I know we've talked about the sim linking and all the different things you could do. It brings everything right back up. But think of the beauty of that for the average person. If you say, hey, Linux is not impervious to getting a virus. You click on the wrong thing, you could bring a virus in. You've opened that vault door and you've just let them walk in. But here you go. You take this, you turn around, you slap that back in your system, and the only thing you might have lost is what you did in the last week or two since you made the clone or whatever it is, but at least you're up and running with your familiar drive. And then you can restore or redo that one if you want and go and move forward. That's a huge thing. It's not just the backup, but the clone is just mirroring what you have. Because then they don't have to sit and spend the hours of reloading programs, which in Linux too, that's the other nice thing. We know that the software doesn't take much to load. It's just trying to remember the list. I've got 40 something programs in here, so do I use them all? No.
Well, what would you say to somebody, or maybe how do you learn specifically when you have an issue? Is it you're a visual learner through a YouTube tutorial, or you like to read wikis, or how do you learn to fix problems for yourself?
Well, quite honestly, I've never been a person that likes to read. Even since I was a kid, I scan. I've learned to kind of scan over and pick out the information I need. And I will read in detail when it's something that's really critical for me or I need to know something. But I've learned most of what I've learned, believe it or not, through YouTube and videos and just conversations with people. So I think most people tend to be visual beings, and most people will sit and watch a video easier than they will to have to read, 2, 3, 4 pages of something.
I don't know. Nate likes documentation. I'm going to say.
I was going to say on the other side, I don't know where my kids get it from, but they're all bookworms, So yeah, he's probably one of those exceptions. Well, Dave too. I mean, when you listen to Dave talking, some of the stuff he gets into, I mean, the things he talks about, it's just, I'm amazed, And even Derek, when you listen to Derek his videos and some of the things, and Derek will say, "Oh, I'm nothing special. I'm not a big techie guy. I just, and that he's done so many things with so many distros, and right down to breaking it while he's on a live stream and keep plugging through it. It's like he said, Linux has got to hurt a little bit. It's kind of funny how some of the catchphrases have come along within this community and stuff, and they're funny, but there's a reason for them. They've all got some kind of a meaning behind them.
Yes, they do. They do. And Linux does hurt a little bit sometimes, just saying.
Oh, yeah. But that's how you learn. It really is how you learn. You have to experience it to learn.
Well, Joe, what do you think of when I say the term the year of the Linux desktop?
Well, I have to agree with Ryan. He said it best, I think, not all that long ago. He said, it's here. It really is here. I think most people perceive year of the Linux desktop as replacing maybe Windows. I don't know that that'll ever happen. But the fact that the desktop is as prevalent and popular as it is already right now, it's here, it's on machines, it's being manufactured. I think it's here. It's just what can we do moving forward, with it. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but to me, most people look at it, the perception, like I said, of replacing Windows. I don't look at it that way.
Well, I don't think that it would ever replace Windows, because say Windows went away tomorrow. Yes, you would have an influx of people running Linux. But to be honest with you, I think Chrome OS would end up taking over the majority of users, because the majority of people out there don't have the love or passion for fixing things or learning new things. They're busy in their lives. They don't really care what operating system they have. They just want to be able to do what they got to do and move on. So I don't think Linux will even get there, even if Windows went away tomorrow. It's
Right.
something would take that place. Something would fill the vacuum. But on the other hand, as far as the year of the Linux desktop, I'm going to agree that it's already here. I think I forget who the first one that said it was. Forgive me for not remembering, but it's just getting old thing. The first one that said it said what I believe is it's the year that you decided to run Linux. That to me is your year of the Linux desktop. It's a personal thing. So when you felt that freedom from Windows by running Linux and you were super excited to boot up your computer again, rather than just, turn on my computer, that is the year of the Linux desktop for you.
That's actually very well said. And I do remember somebody saying that, and I wish I could remember who it was too. Senior moment. But yeah, it is true. That actually is a perfect way to put it. It's the day that you decided to stay on it. And maybe saying replacing Windows wasn't the right phrase. Maybe being up there comparing it to the big three automakers, because it is now coming into that category. When they talk about Mac, Windows, and Linux, it's right there now. It's not like it's never heard of it before. It's listed on packaging. It's listed on the Wi-Fi, USB Wi-Fi device that you plug into the back of your computer. It'll say Linux compatible, so it's there. You know.
Well, I don't see Windows going away. I mean, I threw that out there as a hypothetical, but
right.
Windows isn't going anywhere. Businesses run on Windows, and so it's not going anywhere right at the moment.
Well, it's funny you say that because I know more and more businesses around here are starting to run Linux too. And I had somebody contact me about maybe building them a Linux computer, and they do run GNU Cache and all of that stuff too. So, Noah Chalaya, I remember he did a video some time ago with his father. His father is I don't know if he's a cardiac surgeon or he's a cardiac doctor. I know that. And he had developed some sort of a software that they use, like they use now in the medical industry for, dictating, capturing records and things like that. And it sounds like it's a much more streamlined system, but because the cost involved that would take to put it in place is what's holding him back. I kind of remember that. And I thought that's really sad because it sounds like it would really streamline the medical industry.
Well, and that's why I said, businesses run on Linux. Yes, you're going to have the occasional business run Linux, but I'm talking like major businesses,
yes.
Thousands of computers, they need Windows to run. So,
yeah.
Well, Joe, if you could change one thing about Linux, what would it be?
I knew that question was coming, and I had an answer in my mind, and it went. I think one of the things, if you're talking Linux or Linux community, speaking
Either
about
one.
it, I think it's more the perception that it's only good for running the basic tasks. I don't agree with that because anytime you hear somebody speak about it, they say, well, if all you want to do is get on and surf the net, and if all you want to do is type a Word document, it's much more than that. And it's the same thing I mentioned last night about Mint. A lot of people say, well, Mint's only for new users, and I'm not as advanced as a lot of people, but I am far from a new user. And I think Mint is awesome for what it offers. So I think if we could get away from the perception that it's only for basics, and that so much more can be done with it as a tool, I think that would be a huge step in the right direction.
Well, I think we're guilty of it, and I'll say I'll include we, but I think I'm guilty of saying it like that, but not in the sense of saying it like that's all it's good for, but in the sense of convincing somebody who is for that use case. So if you're in that use case area and all you do is surf the web, it's perfect for you. And you're trying to convince somebody that's, and I guess maybe we shouldn't try to convince people. We should just try to present it and let them make their own choice.
And I think that's true too. It's not always meant to be like it sounds. Most of the time when we're speaking of that, you say, well, what would be the best distro to get somebody over from Windows? That would be the most Windows like. Well, yeah, let's face it, Mint does look a lot like that because of the way the menu's set up and that sort of thing. I have my reservations about Ubuntu. I remember years ago I had sold a system with Unity on it to somebody, and her big thing was being able to get on and do her gambling site game thing. It was whatever she did. And when she looked at it, she goes, "Oh my God, what is this?" Because it had the side, taskbar or whatever. But then after she was on it a while, she said, "I absolutely love this."
Yep.
I think GNOME, as much as it's pretty and flashy and people probably could adapt to it, I think it might intimidate them a little bit because they're not sure. They're always going to be looking for that click for the start menu if you're coming from Windows. Now, that said, if you get somebody like my dad's 87 years old. I never thought he'd have a piece of technology in his hand. And about a year or so ago, year and a half or whatever, he got an iPad or whatever, and to see the great grandkids and that sort of thing. And you get somebody that's never been on it before, that's coming on it from scratch. It's going to be, I think, easier for them to adapt. I've seen that firsthand with some people that, especially elderly people, they like the simplicity and that kind of thing. And I'm not targeting elderly people in general, or specifically, but that's the one that comes to mind, that because I've used this phrase before and I mean it very respectfully. It's like the mind of a child. When you get a child that's learning something for the first time, it's the same thing when you take an elderly person who's never had technology in their life. And now you're bringing them to this for the first time and you're showing them this piece of equipment and how it works. I do think they adapt to it better than even Windows to some extent. So there's mainly because I think in some ways there's less problems. A lot of people might disagree with me. There was a time I wouldn't have said that because let's face it, you loaded a Linux distro on a machine, it took forever to try to find the drivers and do this. And now I find that everything works better right out of the box with Linux loading it than even Windows, because Windows you still have to load drivers specifically.
Right.
9 times out of 10, a Linux distro is going to fire right up.
Well, I think that there is a market there that we could get elderly people, as long as they're open. And I don't think it needs to be specified as elderly. I think regardless of who you're talking to, they have to be open to it. And if they're not open to it, it doesn't matter what age or what technical ability they have. They have to be open to looking at it. Otherwise, you just got to let them make the choice, basically.
Right. And I think the reason I probably have stated that more so because part of my business as a contractor was doing things for people with disabilities or impairments or whatever. Which now it's getting to be less correct to say handicapped, but and I did do things for children too. There were children with disabilities, but the majority of the clientele were older. And that's where I would see a lot of the first-hand things of them being receptive with not only just technology from a computer standpoint, but even devices that I would deal with for somebody that they would need, whether it was a standing walker or exerciser or whatever. There's so much equipment out there now and a lot of it, from my understanding now, is starting to be run by Linux too. That's coming out, even more innovation.
That's because Linux is everywhere, Joe.
Exactly. Okay, Michael. I mean, Rocco. Now there's a guy that does great marketing.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
So, Joe, thinking back on the reasons that you chose to run Linux that first time, do they still apply today?
I think so, because it came down to pure curiosity. I mean, it really did. You can't help but be curious about this. There's just something about it that draws you in, more so now than even back when I tried it the first time. But if you think about the fact that I saw it in a magazine, there was a disc there, and I was seeing these articles on it. Again, person that doesn't like to typically read, but those things I did do back then because they were of strong interest to me. I don't know if people really even read magazines anymore with the electronic world like they used to. My wife still is the type of person that likes to have a book in her hand. She likes to take a book with her, not a Kindle or electronic device. She wants to have that paper copy in her hand or hardcover. Um, but you talk about the simplicity of a marketing idea of just putting a disc in with a magazine as part of that bonus feature when you bought it, and the curiosity was enough to make you want to try it. I mean, even going back to basics, I've said this many times over, just going back to basics and how computers were originally meant to run. It's almost, as much as I love technology, there's a side that I very much dislike it, the way it's gone. I remember buying a computer and couldn't wait for it to show up and jumping on it and doing the things that I had to do. And now I almost feel like, because I know so much about it, it's almost a detriment, if that makes any sense. Sometimes when you know more than you should, you're never happy. And I think that's where the distro hoppertitis comes in, So
yeah, it does. I mean, we had that conversation about it, that, it's always that new and shiny feature. Well, I mean, just think about it. Ubuntu just came out this past Thursday. Yeah. Don't you feel that? I mean, I feel that urge inside to try every Ubuntu distro that's out there now, because it just released and you want to try it out, And I think that's where, you get distro hopping from.
Well, the other thing too, when you really think about this, who ever heard of a virtual machine before? I mean, really, when you think about it, and you're coming into this world, and that's the other beauty of this. Yes, you have to be open-minded to the fact that it may not run as well on that. But if you want to see what something looks like and not really delve into it, you can fire up a virtual machine. I mean, it's a real simple piece of software to load. It doesn't matter if you're on Mac, Windows, or Linux. It's available on all of them to try it. I mean, that's one of the best tools out there.
Yep.
That we have. Or if you want to run Windows, so to speak, in a virtual environment, you can do that. If you really need to.
That's something that I've never done. Never run Windows in a virtual environment.
I'd be too afraid to. I've loaded them up in there, but I think some of you people say, why don't you do your accounting in there? And I just would be too afraid of it being too unstable or something happening to it.
Yeah, well, when it's something that you need, like not just something you want. Like, okay, so for me, I don't need anything on Windows. I use it to play games. But if my Windows partition died or whatever and I wasn't able to play anymore, that's not something I need. But for something like your accounting software, where taxes are concerned and documents that you need to have and need to be available, there's no question that you got to have it. And VirtualBox is not the answer for that.
Well, I could, in theory, if I wanted to really do this, to get off of Windows from the accounting standpoint, I could go to their online service. I'm not a conspiracy guy, but I don't trust putting not only my personal information, but my client's personal information up somewhere where I don't know where it's being stored. No matter how big the company is, I just don't trust that.
So you're not a cloud guy?
No, not at all. I mean, if it came down to, have like I've used Dropbox to transfer photos out briefly just up into my computer as a tool, and then take them right back out and delete them. Yeah, they're up there, but there's nothing up there that's so private. It's more for when I'm photographing to go online to sell an item, that kind of thing. I haven't bought into the cloud side of it yet. Especially when you hear these multi-million people being hacked on something that, especially in the credit card world and all these other things, it's just,
what drives me insane is these companies that you trust that don't keep their stuff secure, like their password, or like our passwords, like our files. And we're hardening our security now and everything. But why wasn't your security hardened before this? That's what upsets me the most,
Well, let's get back to Mint for a quick second here. Mint gets a bad rap from the one time that there was a hack. Well, was the distro hacked?
No.
Yes and no. It was in the sense when the site was hacked because they were foolish enough to put a weak password to where it pulled down, somebody hacked the distro and then put it back up. But they were foolish enough to leave a footprint that they were found right away. So So was the distro really hacked? No, I don't look at it as being hacked either. It was the site. It was poor decision on the back end of their website that allowed somebody to get in to get their hands on the distro. But it was caught within hours. And that speaks volumes too, because I guarantee you would have never seen or heard about it from Microsoft until weeks later.
Well, and I don't mean to frown on everybody that's ever been hacked to say you weren't secure. I mean to say these technical security institutions that are being hacked. And it's like, this is what you do for a living. So like, for example, and I hate to bring things up like this, but like LastPass, when that came out, like, you are a password manager company. I mean, how can you not secure your stuff? Right. I mean, that's what you do. Okay, so in Linux Mint's case, you have a website that's hacked or a password that's hacked on a website. That is terrible as far as no, it shouldn't happen. But that's not what I was referring to. I'm more referring to these companies that this is what you do for a living and you got hacked. I mean, you got to be kidding me.
Well, and the reason I brought up Mint was, and I knew what you meant, but the reason I brought Mint up is because that still till today every so often surfaces where people talk about, when we talk about it being a more secure, it's not totally secure, but a more secure system. And then I see people go, yeah, but Mint was hacked. Well, that was a one-time case. It was a mistake and it was corrected almost immediately. Yes, when you're talking large companies, I don't know that anybody will ever be completely what's the word I want to use? They won't be able to not be vulnerable at some point in their world of being, when you're networked and you're out on the internet, because there's always going to be some hacker who, if they want to be diligent enough and put the time and effort into it, they're going to do it. But then that's why there's white hat hackers too. And I'm going to use that as a comparison because my vehicle, I drive a Dodge. It's the first one I ever owned. There was and it's run by Linux, but they had a vulnerability in there where basically a hacker could have taken control of the vehicle, shut it down while you're on the highway. And so Chrysler wasn't listening, and then they got white hat hackers that sat in their apartment with Ubuntu, and they did a video and showed what can be done with this, right down to taking it safely in a parking lot and disabling the brakes, and it just kind of coasted off the edge of the parking lot. And then Chrysler took notice and put a patch out, and now they're putting regular patches all the time. So there's both sides to the coin. It's not all people that hack are always the ones with the dark side to them. There are good ones out there too to try to counteract this. But I think when you're in a network or internet world, it's going to be impossible to ever, be 100% secure.
Well, somebody had made the statement, and I agree to a certain extent, that it's not about being hacked that concerns me. It's how the company reacts to being hacked that concerns me. So that's not a 100% blanket statement for me, but I do get that point of it.
Well, the sad part is you're not going to see or hear about it right when it happens, because they're going to try to get a fix going and everything else. And that's the sad part, is by the time you find out, there's been a lot of time that passes, and it makes you worry or wonder, how vulnerable was I, or what information? You'll never know unless something directly happens to you, and whether you were affected or not.
Right.
So it's really sad.
Well, Joe, is there anything else you want to share with people?
Anybody that's thinking about wanting to just join a wonderful community, even if you don't get on Linux, just to learn something, to hear about it, to be around a group of people that are just like anybody else in the world that you talk to. I mean, this is a wonderful place to be. I would like to see, kind of like the message that's been going around that Ellen DeGeneres said, be nice to people. I mean, that holds true even in here. It's so often it's easy to look at I was always taught the only dumb question is the one that's never asked. And so often you see people being made fun of because they ask something that sounds, pardon the phrase, stupid to them or foolish. It doesn't take, and it doesn't cost anything or a lot of effort to just be nice and to offer a helping hand, pay it forward, whatever, because somewhere along the line, you got it yourself too in order to get where you're at. So I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think, and I think this community, um, I'd like to think there's nothing like it. I mean, I'm sure there are other communities with other different type programs, projects, whatever it is, or organizations. But from a virtual world of people who are real people and want to come together and learn something that could maybe be paid forward, this is a great place to do it. And I want to thank you very, very much for the opportunity and that first show. I'll never forget how unnerved I was, thinking, here I'm going on this guy's show. Is he going to really, be open to, to me or what I would have to say or listen, and, that kind of thing. And it's been wonderful. And look at how much it's grown, Rocco. And that's a testament to you and the respect people have for you and what you've done here. It really is amazing. And thank you is not a strong enough word to say how I feel and how everybody else does, I believe.
Well, I appreciate that, Joe, but I think your statement before speaks volumes, and that's everybody has something to give to the community. It doesn't matter who you are, and that's kind of where the whole last word for Biddle came into place. Where it didn't, like, whoever joined the stream, it didn't matter if you were technical, it didn't matter if you talked at all through the whole stream. You at least got one chance to say what you wanted to say at the last word, and that's where that all comes from. So,
well, and I think too, even if you don't have something really to offer in your own mind, if you want to just be there and be a part of it, to be involved, just to be there, I think that in itself should be enough. And you've done that. You've done that with opening the doors, so to speak, to your home, your middle home.
So, how can people get in touch with you, Joe? You use social media or what?
I do. I have a website, or not a website, excuse me, a Facebook page that's Power PC Systems, which I actually am changing over to Tux Power PC. And the reason why I'm doing that is because when I picked that name, I did my homework and I realized, well, Power PC is probably trademarked from a certain company.
Yeah.
So I realized that pretty quickly. But in any event, yes, I'm on Facebook, but I do have a website as well, too, that I'm working on coming up. It'll be tuxpowerpc.com. So I just bought hosting for it, ironically, yesterday, and I'm going to start building a website and things. So, and then, of course, through Biddle, or Telegram, so.
Yep. Well, so we talk every week probably, but I really appreciate you joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This has been a real pleasure. And I'm humbled by the fact that you even allowed me to do this. So
there you go. All right, that's going to wrap it up. Thank you all for joining us this week as we spotlight the best thing about Linux, our community. Until next time, long live Linux.
Bye, everyone.
Hello and welcome to... Wait, hold on. Okay, you ready?